Tonight's keynote address is Judge Kael McKenzie, and it is sponsored by the philanthropy, the Silver Gummy Foundation that is based in Calgary. Silver Gummy's mission is to reduce sexual and domestic violence through intersectional feminist education with a focus on youth whose outlook on gender is still developing. They hope to cultivate self-esteem, a respect for all genders, and an understanding of how to maintain healthy relationships. Silver Gummy recognizes that change is only possible when research institutions, community programming, schools, and youth have reciprocal relationships of teaching and learning. Now, you may be wondering what kind of foundation is called Silver Gummy, and because it is a foundation that is largely focused on youth, not entirely, they thought the gummy bears were kind of a friendly image to have, and silver because it's gender neutral. Okay, so let me introduce Kael McKenzie, our keynote speaker tonight. He's going to come up in a moment. He was appointed to the Provincial Court of Manitoba in 2015, and he is the first transgender person ever appointed a judge in Canada and the first trans masculine judge in the world. And he's also a member of the Manitoba Métis Nation. So prior to his appointment, he was a Manitoba lawyer who practiced primarily in family law and criminal law. And while we were waiting, I heard that he sent a lot of people to jail over those years. And before attending law school, he served in the Canadian Forces. He's a regular speaker and educator across Canada and elsewhere on 2S LGBTQIA+ issues. He's married to his partner, Christine, and has 2 children who are the light of his life. His favorite pastime is fishing, especially ice fishing on Lake Winnipeg. All right, so the title of his talk is My Experience, Strength, and Hope. So please join me in welcoming Kael McKenzie to the podium.
Well, I guess it's now or never for me to figure out what I'm going to say today. I have to be honest. I'm sorry. Microphones are weird me out a little bit, but I've spent most of today figuring that out, and so I hope I have something for you to say. I do this a few times a year. I will find myself in very similar position speaking to a group of folks. This is my first trans-focused group that I've ever addressed, so it makes me very happy. It brings me joy. First, I should probably say that I want to do a land acknowledgement. I know you've probably heard them throughout the day, and so I'm not going to repeat everything. But as a Métis person and a relative, I am grateful to be here on this land, and I think that I should also acknowledge the water. You've heard that I enjoy fishing, but what it is for me is being on the water. It sustains me, and it recharges my battery. And I know that water for the Indigenous folks of this place was a big part of their survival. And so I just add both my gratitude for being allowed to be here today and for being connected with the water that's here. In addition, I have to say that before I go to my speech, I was very saddened by the announcement that some folks weren't able to be here today because of the fear that they have of crossing the borders. And I hope that some of them are able to join us online. And for those of you who have made it, thank you for being brave. I just hope that they're somewhere safe with people that they love and that they can have some joy in their lives, and that we'll get through this, and we will get through this together. Okay, so I have 3 caveats. I like to do things in threes. I don't know, somewhere in law school somebody told me about the power of 3, and it's just stuck with me, but that's why I always come up with 3 things. And so the first caveat, and I have to say this every single time I speak anywhere, I'm a judge in Provincial Court of Manitoba, and none of the things that I'm going to say today have anything to do with the Provincial Court of Manitoba. They're all my own opinions. And for All right. So I said it. When you hear what I'm going to say, no one's going to be going like, "Oh, do you think that's the view of the Provincial Court of Manitoba?" Of course not, right? But that being said, I am a judge, and so when I'm telling you about some things today, even when I'm what I've just said, I can only go so far. Judges have this little ethical principle called impartiality, and what that means is that I have to be really careful about some of the things that I say and some of the things that I do to make sure that I'm not biased and or have the perception of bias. And so I can't speak on things like politics. I can't speak on controversial issues. I'm not going to address our upcoming election or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, some things are kind of fair game. Like, when we talk about, so pride, for example, pride is a protest, right? I can go to that because it has a dual purpose of celebration, but there is some limitation. So that's one of my caveats. And my third caveat, I'm not a public speaker. I have never been trained as a public speaker. I've never done public speaking. Prior to my appointment, I do speak a lot of things. Oftentimes, I'm with an academic, though, who does all the heavy lifting for me. And I get to do the kind of the soft, light, fun stuff. But so I'm not a researcher. I'm not an academic. I don't have anything that I'm trying to sell you. If I had a fancy new design or something of that nature, I could tell you all about that. But I don't have any of those things. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to just tell you about me, and I'm going to try to be as authentic as I possibly can. And if I send a message of hope at the end, which is my intention, great. If not, well, it's nice to meet everybody and you get to know me a little bit. So, okay. So I'm not kidding. I'm going to start at the beginning. Okay. So, as I've already told you, I am Métis. I'm a member of the Two-Spirit Michif Local of the Manitoba Métis Federation. What's unique about that is that most of our locals are geographically based. So if you live in Winnipeg, you're in the Winnipeg local. If you live in Dauphin, you're in the Dauphin local, or Selkirk or wherever, Keewatin, across the province. We're unique because we're the only one that's based on gender expression, gender identity, and I guess sexual orientation. And so we're all over the province, which is kind of nice, and that's how we connect with one another. So my dad's side of the family is where my Indigenous ancestry comes from, and my family comes from the Duck Mountain area of Manitoba. My dad was born in a little town called San Clara, and my grandparents and my dad's family lived in a one-room house that had a stove and a dirt floor in a place called Boggy Creek, which is a small Métis community in Manitoba. My mom's side is the French Canadians, first generation Canadian. My mom's a first generation Canadian. Family came over from Europe. And there I was. My parents separated a year before I was born. You can do the math, something's off. They were figuring it out, okay? But what that meant is that my dad wasn't around a lot when I was growing up, which is probably not a unique experience. Although in the 70s, most of my friends had intact parents. Not so much anymore, but back then it wasn't. It was a little bit unique. When I was growing up, I didn't know that I was being slurred racially. Like the neighbors used to call me the little squaw down the street, and I didn't know what that meant. And and today, obviously, I know what it means. But and they also used to call me the little tomboy squad down the street. So for me, growing up, my mom tells the story right from the time I could put my own clothes on that she'd put me in a little dress. I know, picture it, right? Yeah, it's not so much, right? I was sitting here while Aaron was speaking. I was like, "Who's that guy with the bald head in the back?" And yeah, it was me. That I would put my own I would take off my dress and I'd put on a pair of blue jeans and a t-shirt and off I went. And so from the time I was very little, I was a boy. I don't know what everybody else was talking about, but in the 70s, we just didn't have any words or language for that. Yeah, and some nods in the audience of some folks who grew up back then, and I didn't know anything about, I didn't even know what gay was. I remember the first time anybody ever said the word gay to me. And this is kind of a cute little story, but my grandma bought us all the grandkids got a record for Christmas. And I'm talking about an LP, like not like a total vinyl record. And mine was the Village People. Okay. Yeah. And so I was actually in the hallway of our house, and I'm sitting there, and there's inside the record, there's an insert of the Village People, right? And so, all of the four characters, all dressed up in their costumes and whatnot. And my brother, and I'm like, oh man, this is so cool, right? And my brother comes over and he says, they're all gay, right? I don't care. And away he went. But I wasn't looking, he thought I was ogling them, right? Because I was a little girl looking at these macho guys, I guess. I don't know what you want to call them. But I had no intention of ogling them. I was like, I loved what they were wearing. I want to be a construction worker. I want to be a cop. I want to be like, I didn't have any clue what he was talking about, right? So anyway, I'm totally digressing and I'm really bad for it, but as I like to tell stories. So growing up, I didn't know anything. It wasn't until I was in junior high that I knew gay. People say kids call each other gay and stuff like that. Not where I grew up. No clue. Not, and maybe I'm just naive and sheltered. I have no idea, but I certainly never used that slur and I never heard it once, except for from my older brother who said that to me that one day. And I was like 6 or something. Like didn't stick. And I didn't really know anything about gay until I was about 13, 14 years old. And then I was like, oh, okay, this is probably what's going on. I am attracted to women, right? And to that point, I'd grown up with all of this kind of shame and really like that I want to be a boy. I'm a boy and I'm a girl and I'm a tomboy and they call me this other name and all of these things. And I don't know if you all know, but probably most of you do. When you live with shame, so I lived with shame because my grandparents hid our Indigenous identity. So there was always this underlying thing in our family that we were embarrassed of. And then add on that I was ashamed that I thought I was a boy because everybody was telling me I was a girl. And when you live with shame, I mean, it eats away at your soul, right? And it eats away. And from a very young age, maybe 13 years old or something like that, I started drinking. And alcohol became my mask, right? It masked everything for me. And I was much prettier. I was smarter. I didn't feel like a boy if I was under the influence of alcohol. I fit in better. I was more like everybody else, and so that's what this shame built for me. And thank goodness, around that same time, I found the Sea Cadet program. Are you familiar with Sea Cadets? Yeah. So it's a quasi-military organization for youth, and there's Air Cadets, Sea Cadets, Army Cadets, and I found the Sea Cadet program, and I went there, and I started wearing a uniform. And for a little trans boy, wearing a uniform is the closest thing that you can get to when you don't know what it is that you have, right? Like, there's something not quite the same as everybody else, but you don't know what it is. I was so free in a uniform, and I excelled. You wouldn't believe. I got my first 2 months I spent there, I won top junior cadet because I was so into it, because it just made me feel like I belonged to something and that I could just be myself. Boys and the girls were the same thing. And it was pretty amazing for me. And of course, from that time, all I wanted to do was get into the military. But of course, I'd realized that, of course, I'm attracted to women at this point. I went into the Canadian Forces, and the problem was they didn't really want me all that badly because they were still at the point where there was the purge. Anybody heard of the LGBT purge? Probably some folks have. It's when the Canadian military, purged all of the gays and lesbians out of the military. It was against the Queen's regulations and orders to be gay and to serve in the Canadian Forces when I entered the forces. So the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I think it was 82, and the equality provisions didn't take effect or came into force in effect until 87. And then the military had another 5 years to come into compliance with the charter. And even though you may know this guy from Burnaby named Sven Robinson, who tried to get sexual orientation as a prohibited ground of discrimination in the charter. Well, what happened was it didn't make it. It was then found to be an analogous ground of discrimination by the court. And so to this day, sexual orientation is not actually in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Neither is gender identity, neither is gender expression, but all are analogous grounds of discrimination. And but the military didn't take effect until 1992, and I was already serving by that time. And I was on parade once, and the officer commanding, and this is going to be really shocking for people in British Columbia anyway. Some people had got caught for using drugs, and they were getting dishonorably discharged. They also went to jail. They were, I know, brace yourselves, smoking marijuana. Today it's just laughable, right? Like, I mean, oh yeah, that's terrible. Do you know what you have to do in military jail? Like, it is constant work. Like, it is not an easy time. You're not sitting there watching TV. You are working the whole time. Anyway, these guys, they got kicked out. The commanding officer got on the parade the next day after these folks got arrested, and they said, any of you who are using drugs or gay or lesbian, or anybody who knows anybody using drugs or are gay or lesbian are all criminals. And so you're just waiting for people to report you, right? And that time was particularly bad for me too, because I was starting to come to, and I'm telling you about the military for more than about the gays and lesbian stuff. I'm telling you, sorry about that. It's time to take my medicine. The military, I call it the best of times, worst of times, and it served me very well. I think hiding, anytime you have to hide who you are and who you are for yourself, I mean, it causes all of these issues. And same thing, I had probably some bad coping mechanisms in my life. But the blessing, and you have to remember, I left the military at 26 years old, okay? So I wasn't very old, but I was already plenty old that I should know things about the world. I did not know that there was trans people in the world at that point in my life. 26 years old. Like that, to me, it just blows my mind that I was so naive. But so what happened is my wife was pregnant, and we were both in the military. She was pregnant with our first son, and we were both getting out of the military. We had both decided we were going to leave, so we were at a doctor's appointment. In the military, you go to a military doctor. And so we were there, and I'm in the waiting room, and I pick up the newspaper. And on the front page is this woman. She's wearing an Air Force uniform and a skirt. And she is the first woman to transition from male to female in the Canadian, while serving in the Canadian Forces. And this is already after the legislation had changed and we were allowed to be there. We were allowed to be there, but we couldn't go work with the Americans. That was the trade-off if you came out. But so this woman, and I didn't know her name until I spoke at Pride a couple years ago, someone came up to me and told me what her name was. Just blew my mind. But this changed my life, okay? Because all these years I thought it was this lesbian thing, that I was attracted to women, and okay, this makes sense, but it never really fit, right? And I didn't know people could do this. Like, I knew about drag queens, I knew about cross-dressers. My role models when I was a kid, if there was a transgender role model, was Klinger from MASH, which he wasn't really transgender. He was just trying to get out of the army by wearing women's clothes, which the rest of us were trying to stay in the military and not actually get kicked out. And then, of course, the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Those are our role models in that time, and we all know that those aren't real role models. Those are meant for entertainment and titillation or some other things. So this woman had transitioned, and I was like, you could do this? And it all started clicking in place for me. And so when I talk about the military, I don't know, right place at the right time, serendipity, I'm not sure, but it planted a seed, or it germinated a seed that had been growing for my whole life. And here I was. And this is the whole reason that I've told you this whole part of this story about the military is because of this picture. And you have to remember, we have no internet, we have no social media, we have, very few, there are no role models. This is already even in the 90s, right? There might have been the odd one that was coming up, but nobody. And I knew, like I said, a few drag queens, but they were gay men who were entertainers, right? They weren't trans. And I got out of the military, eventually went to university and started getting the internet. And at late nights, 2 o'clock in the morning, found a place. Susan's Page, I think, is that the right thing? Yeah, yeah. You guys know what I'm talking about. I made a couple of friends on there. I found out some information about how you go about doing this, and I was, secretly realizing where things were going. And something about when you start picking up steam, it's really hard to stop. But I had kids. I had little kids. I was recently divorced. My mom, my grandma's like in their mid 90s. Like it was like, what am I going to do with this information? At this point, I'm in my 30s. I really was at a place where I had to make a decision. And when I went to law school, law students, and I'd never been in a situation where I worked somewhere or went somewhere that I was with women who weren't wearing uniforms. And that's what I was used to. And I stuck out like a sore thumb. And so I made a decision. I'm going to fem it up. And I decided that that was the route I was going to go in law school. And of course, pushed me over the edge. The better looking I got, I lost a bunch of weight. I grew my hair. I started wearing makeup and earrings. And I wore a white long dress with a tiara for my wedding and did all of the things, right? And I know it's hard to picture right now. I had a full head of hair back then, and and the better I looked, the worse I felt about myself. And I'm sure lots of you can relate. And I had told my wife, I'd met these young trans folks as I was in law school, and people doing this thing. And I said to her, if I was younger, I'd do this transition thing too, right? And she's like, "What's stopping you?" And my wife was like really, really supportive. She's like, "Let's go," and she's like, "I'll buy you a packer and a binder, and we'll get all this stuff, and we'll get cooked up with clinic and da da." And I was, "Whoa, slow down, honey!" Like I was like, "No, right?" Fast forward a couple years, and we had this conversation again, and there was no more stopping it, right? And I was working in a law firm at this point. I had a really large legal practice. The firm was small. The partners were all octogenarians, so in their 80s, and or very close to, if not. And not that that means anything necessarily, but I had fear. They were conservatives, and I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. And I assumed I was going to have to leave the firm and that I would have to lose some clients, but I couldn't do anything about it. And I had been secretly, you know, transitioning kind of without anybody knowing about it for a while, except for just my wife and I. And the time had come. So I went and I talked to the partners, and they said, it wasn't even a thing. They just honestly just said, okay, we don't care. You don't have to go anywhere as long as you're a good lawyer. Keep up the billable hours. Um, and um, and they were happy. They didn't care. And they said, actually, what they said was, if we lose clients, if they leave, let them go. And I was like, holy shit, like it was pretty amazing. And then, and so I kept working at it. And when I was ready, I changed my name to Kael. McKenzie's actually the name I had at birth, my parents' name. I had been going by a different last name, my ex-wife's last name. And so I changed my first and last name. And I sent my clients a letter. And I said, this was a great letter, one paragraph. I am no longer using this name. I am going by Kael McKenzie, and I'm using he, him pronouns. And if you want to refer to me as Mr., you can do that too. If you have any questions, give me a call. And I did get a call, but it wasn't what I thought I was going to get. It was, hey, that's great. Good for you. I'm so proud of you kind of call. And it was from a kid, a young person that I had gotten out of the Manitoba Youth Center who was facing some not so great charges and was a little bit rough around the edges, but he was like totally proud of me. And the other situation that happened, which to this day I just laugh about, but one of my clients, I had to meet him at the courthouse. So I was going up the stairs and he was coming down the stairs, and I just want you to picture him. So I'm 5'10". He's about 6'2", 6'3". And he's standing over me, okay? And he's a construction worker. He's built like, and his hands, like, I don't have small hands, but I don't have big hands either. But I mean, 3-4 times the size of my hand, right? And so I'm coming up the stairs, and I haven't seen him since. This is the first time I've seen him since this letter. And he comes up and he puts his hand up like this, and I'm like, oh my God, he's gonna hit me. I thought, like, what's happening? But he took my paw and he just cranked it about 1,200 times. And he was just so proud of me and happy. And he's like, congratulations, this is great. And, it was pretty fantastic. I had a really easy time of it. And I went about it in a way that I made sure that there was no gossip. I emailed like practically everyone in the profession. I had someone email all of the judges. And my first time in court, so this is what we used to do. When you came into court, you used to just come up and you'd say your first and last name, or your last name and your first initial. Sometimes you'd spell it. You're probably supposed to spell it all the time, but I rarely ever did. Most people really didn't. But more often than not, because we knew all the judges, they would just say, good morning, Ms. or Mr. or whatever. Who are you here on today? And so I was in this small town called Carmen. I was there for a client, client. And I came up to the podium, first time wearing a tie in court and a nice little suit. And I got up to the podium, and before I had a chance to open my mouth, the judge said, good morning, Mr. McKenzie. And I was like, oh my God. It was amazing. And it just, things like that just kept trickling. And it was like without a hiccup. And, at a time where there were no other trans judges, no lawyers, I should say, there were still no other trans judges. It was not very common. And I had a really, really easy time of it. I went back to prosecutions. I was a prosecutor again. I had been there and I went back. I was prosecuting young offenders at that time when I got appointed to the bench. And I'm getting to my point. I swear I am. I know I'm rambling on. Like, okay, not too bad. It's only 10 after 8. We're good. So I got appointed to the bench on December 17 of 2015. And what happens when you get appointed? You apply and you go through the process. They interview you. They go send everything over to the Minister of Justice, and the Minister of Justice, in some magical fashion or form, makes a decision about who they're going to appoint as for the position of judge. For whatever reason, they appointed me, and I got a call, I don't know, like 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Minister would like to speak to you. Okay. And he's like, put down your pen. You're now a judge. You're no longer a lawyer. So which is really weird because you have all of these things that you're supposed to do. And, so I hung up the phone, and after I was done with him, and I was like, oh my God. Right. The phone rang again. this time it was the press secretary for the government, whose name is Rachel. And some of you might know Rachel. I don't know. I'm not going to out them, but trans woman just happens to be, and happens to be somebody that I already knew. And she said, Kael, this is historic. This is historic, and we want to include that you are the first trans judge appointed to any level of court in government in Canada, or in any level of court in Canada. And I said, oh, this might be some news. You know, and I guess it had crossed my mind, you know, when I applied, but I wasn't thinking about it at the time. And I thought, you know what? One person. All I have to do is help one person by being open and out about my being transgender and being a judge. And if I help one person to realize that they can be something more than what many of my people have traditionally been, you know, and I don't want to get into some of the negative stuff, but you all know. And so I said yes. And then the media began. And I wasn't really prepared for that. You know, like it was big news. I was in national news and my picture was plastered all over. Somebody within days wrote a Wikipedia page about me. I don't even know where they got it from. I was like, somebody said, you know, there's a Wikipedia. I was, no. And so I went through this process, and you know, it was interesting because the only thing that really kind of stuck in my head was that people were going to think I was a DEI hire, you know, and I was like, I'm qualified for this. This is merit based as well. I mean, it may have been very helpful, but you know, I was a lawyer for a long time and have done lots of work in our community and whatnot. And so a few days later, I got the call from the one person. It was a mom in Ottawa, and she said, you know, I just want to thank you. I've been worrying so much about my trans kid. Not and the woman was a lawyer, and she said, you know, I was thinking that there wouldn't be anything for them, and I now know that my kids can be anything. They could be a judge, and it doesn't have to stop whatever that ceiling is. Yeah, it was can be anything. And you know, and now today, and like that's almost 10 years ago, not quite, but it's getting pretty close. You know, we have so many more role models. We have so many more people out there who are demonstrating that trans folks are everywhere in every profession, academics, doctors, lawyers, judge, whatever the case may be. I'm a little disappointed that I don't have a colleague yet in 10 years, but it will happen, and it will happen relatively soon, I am certain. Of course, I said that 10 years ago, but you know, and we're at this place in our history right now where things are looking a little bit bleak. You know, I think we're all kind of wondering what's going to happen. The Americans have said there's only two genders. I mean, biologically, that's not right, but I don't know. I'm not in their head, and you know, and I have some thoughts on that. And of course, as yeah, and so I know that I'm not naive enough to think that there's not already some other issues here in Canada as well. But you know, I'm reminded of a couple of things, and I'm not gonna go too much further, but on that part because, like I said, I just can't. But what I do know, and I don't know, you're probably all familiar with Maya Angelou. So Maya Angelou is a poet author who read a poem, and it's Ocean Blue, I think, or something of that nature. She read her poem at Bill Clinton's inauguration. And part of her poem said, sorry, I'm going to get this wrong. Let me just get it because I don't want to mess it up. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. And I feel like right now we're at a place in our history where, we went from like in my short lifetime, it's 50 years. I mean, I'm 50, almost 54. But we went from like there's like nothing. We don't know about, there's trans people. Like we were already there. Like I know about it now, but I didn't know about it then. And there is some history, and trans folks were side by side at Stonewall and all of the big pieces. So there's been trans folks all throughout all of the trans or the gay rights movement and whatnot. And we've quietly, I think, been very successful in getting our language out, creating language for ourselves, creating space for ourselves, and creating our history and collecting it and doing all of these things. And we've been very successful. And I think if we look at every social justice movement in history, there have been pushback by government, pushback. And the reason that there's pushback is because we're so darn successful at, again, all of the things that I just said. And we're challenging people's norm, right? And we're challenging people's values that they think are their values. I'm sure that the people that had slaves didn't really want to give them up. There was a fight because it was changing their lives. Women's rights, changing their lives. The white minority in South Africa and our apartheid, they're changing their lives. They're changing their power and their structure. And we're at that place in history right now, I think, and this is my opinion, where we're at that retching pain right now a little bit, and it's again because we've pushed them to that piece. But I really feel very strongly that 2, 3, 5, 10 years, whatever the case may be, hopefully not the latter, that the pushback is going to show that we're on the right side of history. And that will be the history that was the painful part that we're going to have maybe in our archives at some point, where we're saying to folks, okay, this is what happened and this is how we dealt with it and this is how this all came to be. And I don't profess to know how that change is going to come about with what's happening right now. And I feel so grateful in Canada that every single jurisdiction has human rights protection for us. So not all have it spelled out exactly. Every jurisdiction, including the Federal Human Rights Act code, has discrimination based on gender included in the code. Some have gender expressions, some have gender identity. And I'm pretty sure Manitoba's is going to be opening up and changing to add in a couple things that weren't included the last time it opened up. But we have these protections in Canada, and I know there's some folks from across the world that are either online or here. And, we're very, very fortunate to have that right now. Of course, we still have to have constant vigilance, and we know that, there's some places that there is some pushback happening. But I think, like I said, I think that we're facing that pain right now that Maya Angelou was talking about. And she was talking about history, but I think we're in a place where this is our wrenching pain. And my hope for us is that we come out of this and we come out and we can still do everything we need to do with peace, with joy, with love, and that we can have that courage that they're talking about to get through all of this. And I really think that given all of these things that have happened and all of the people who are there with us, I have to tell you, the Americans are not, in my mind, in my opinion, I always thought that we were way ahead of them. We were way ahead of them with our rights and with our acceptance and knowledge and all of those things. There's a lot of people in that country, and they're not all on that side, right? And I can tell you that when I go speak with folks, I often use American resources when I am talking to judges. The judges have been really responsive in Canada. I've spoken in Texas, And I had tremendous support there when I was there. I was nervous to go there, but it was fine. Even with what's happening in Texas right now, right? Like the judges that I spoke to there were very receptive. And I use a booklet for all of my education that I do with Canadian judges from the National Center for State Courts, which is where the American Judges Association is housed. They have a tremendous resource. I use a bench card, and I would say there's probably maybe 100 judges in Canada that use this bench book. What a bench book is purely as an insert that we have a book that we write in. That's our bench book. And then we have a bench book insert that we can put in, and it's like cheat sheets almost, if that makes sense, so that we make sure that we're saying the right thing. So sometimes when I'm doing bail court, I don't do bail court very often, which is judicial interim release, but sometimes I have to. So I have to just remember that I have to hit these big topics when I'm giving my decision. So there's a bench book card that's out of New York State that I have given hundreds and hundreds of judges in Canada so that they could use it, because it is phenomenal. It breaks down pronouns, it breaks down how to say things, what not to say. And so, I know that they are with us, and that there are lots of folks over there that are with us too. And I really, I know I'm being very Pollyanna, I think, a little bit. Like I know that there's going to be some hardship probably in the next little while, but I really do think there's a lot of hope. And I think that we're at a place where soon it'll be like gay people are right now. I don't know about you, but I turn on the television sometimes, and honestly, not very often, but there'll be a commercial. Like, gay people are everywhere. They're in Hallmark movies. They're in, you'll see an advertisement for furniture. Like, they're sitting on the sofa to buy the piece of furniture. They're in the bank ads. They're in the mortgage ads. Like, they're everywhere, just mainstream, right? It's not a big deal. Like, everybody knows somebody's gay. It used to be like my son, when he came out, he says, I don't want you to make a big deal of it. Okay. It's like, I'm not going to make a big deal of it. It doesn't matter to me. Are you dating anybody? And I don't want you to make a big deal of it. But it's not a big deal anymore. And I really think that that's where we're heading to. We're just going to be part of the mainstream. We're going to be able to express ourselves, whether you're non-binary, gender diverse, transgender. And I use transgender a lot in this. I want everybody to know that I really mean it in the biggest umbrella possible. So anyway, I'm probably rattling on now, and I think you get the point that we have the courage, and it's gonna be just fine. And I know that some of my friends who are much longer in their transition than I am, have experienced a lot of bad things over time, and things are so much better now. We've come a long way, and I know that coming a long way is not all the way, but we're getting there, and it's going to happen. And events like this, I mean, it's just amazing. We can't ask for, well, we can ask for more, but but we're doing pretty darn good. So I hope I've left you with some hope. I thank you, and keep doing all the good work that you're doing. And then once you've done your academic work, feel free to call me to do the fluff pieces.